Hello, 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 GRC Me listeners. I'm Heath Anderson. I'll be the guest host. And for those who don't know, I'm the information security leader here at LogicGate. And I happen to be joined by a very special guest, one Elizabeth Walker. And Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to do a quick little intro about your role and your experience with internal audit.
Yeah, sure. My name is Elizabeth Walker. I'm the security compliance manager here at LogicGate. So I have the immense joy of doing our internal audit. I came from IBM. I was there for 7 years and based out of Dallas, Texas. So happy to be here with y'all.
And there's the first y'all. We'll get going into this. But I think one of the things before, internal audit is our topic for today. And I think one of the questions I always have is, what does internal audit mean to you? I feel like that definition in all the companies that I've been a part of has meant very different things. And so I'm just curious to get a little perspective about you about what does it mean when I say internal audit?
To me, it feels like in a compliance role or department or company, it's kind of the baseline of compliance for a company, right? Like this is where we establish what we want to do, how we want to do it, what standards we want to map to. It's kind of like in my opinion, the beating heart of compliance, right? This is where we build it from the ground up and kind of add on. So.
Awesome. I guess now that you've kind of been at a couple of different places and seen it, maybe we'll start with what's the same, what's consistent in internal audit, and then maybe we'll jump into what's different.
Yeah. So regardless, big company, small company, I always seem to run into the same personalities, I would say, I guess, in working with internal stakeholders and SMEs.
Nice. I was going to say, I feel like that is the same from my experiences. I've gotten a lot of the introduction of a lot of different compliance people and also people that, really help us from like an information security control perspective. Exactly. And I think a lot of times you end up realizing, at the end of the day, the controls are different, but the people are the same. And so like there's definitely a good amount of, I've done this before. Let me, pull out this playbook when it relates to, describing why control is important or, why evidence is applicable.
For sure. And honestly, people are vital to it because I'm not the subject matter expert on a lot of the stuff that we review. So their contributions are invaluable. Now because you're part of my team, but I'm obsessed with the TV show The Office, and I always kind of link personalities that I run into as like a person on The Office. So for example, like if I ask for evidence from a Stanley, he will give me the bare minimum, no more, no less. He's very simple, straightforward, right? A Pam knows a lot about her content, but she's not as confident. So I got to boost her up, kind of like maybe sit with her, go through the evidence, be like, yeah, you got the right stuff. I'm trying to think. Oscar would probably be like the gold star of SMEs, right? He knows his stuff. He pushes back when it seems, or, pushes back for better control wording or better evidence requests, right? And then you occasionally run into like a Dwight who's very skeptical of all audit requests, of all, why is the external auditor asking for this? Why do you need this? Or, you worded it differently. What are you talking about? So yeah, I can go on, but I will not go into all the characters.
I feel like we could probably recreate the whole entire thing with just a whole Office episode dedicated to them trying to make clear an audit. I feel like that makes for excellent, new Office episode.
I would thoroughly enjoy that episode.
Well, I guess one of the things, the first thing is you were mentioning like Stanley. I guess I'm curious, around like, okay, let's shift. We talked about some of the similarities, like how do you handle like a Stanley in this, from an audit perspective? Like what problems have you seen at prior companies that you feel like is just, an aspect of, having to deal with those types of personalities?
Sure. So I think one of the challenges that comes with a Stanley is this person typically hasn't been super involved in the audit or control process, or is maybe not even aware of what they're supposed to be doing. It's kind of the burden of the internal auditor to educate them and say, okay, that one tiny screenshot of text, thank you, that is what I asked for, but I also need to see, the portal it came from and like the timestamp and all of this information. So having some education set up, as well as maybe more descriptive evidence asks or, requests of your stakeholders of the SMEs participating can kind of alleviate that sometimes. So
totally. And I feel like that explains a lot when I kind of think about my, the roles that I've been in, is you sometimes get like a very descriptive, like, this is what I need. And I feel like when I'm in that, in the boat of receiving that, I'm always sitting there being like, why are you haven't you telling me exactly what report to run? And I think a lot of that is lost in terms of the situation that you're in.
They've ran into a Stanley at some point in their career, and they're course correcting.
Exactly. I feel like the other thing I would say, and just coming from it, from a more of a support versus, the people that are driving it truly from a compliance perspective, I think one of the other problems that I've seen that's really hard is a lot of times the problems that kind of surface are really around just how the conversation happens. And I think that's one of the things that has brought me to LogicGate, and is really thinking about how I interact with security, is like, how do you engage people and get them critically thinking? Because a lot of times, when you have somebody fresh, they're, and they're coming in with a different perspective, they're like, why are we producing this giant piece of evidence when this would be the perfect description of demonstrating that control? And I feel like that sometimes gets lost as like, a compliance program matures, is that, if it worked once, it works again. And I think that's one of the big challenges you have to have as you're kind of thinking about this, is how do you keep yourself aligned to the current process, and then hopefully make yourself as efficient as possible. So I think that's one of the things that I've seen, is like, how do you break out of that? And I think that'll be what we can kind of maybe shift into that, and how you're doing that here at LogicGate.
So in thinking on that, a lot of the time where I see us getting stuck, or, even in my prior roles, where, as you said, we keep relying on what we did before. Oh, we've always done it X way, so we know it works, tried and true. But having conversations, not only having conversations and communications with your stakeholders, but also empowering them. They are the subject matter experts on what I'm asking for, right? So who better to update our control language to give me feedback about how we should be testing it than them? So I think really empowering them, allowing them to give that feedback, and kind of have it set up on a cadence, whether that's monthly, quarterly, to do that. I think that's where we can continually improve and kind of get out of that rut of, okay, we did this last time, we have to do it this time.
No, I think that's fair. And I think that's where I think, in terms of like how we try to approach things, with giving a lot more transparency and really thinking about, hey, at the end of the day, the control owner isn't the compliance team. It's the person that's actually been established as the one accountable. I think that hopefully does help have that conversation, because at the end of the day, like, they're having to report and deal with the scenario versus it kind of going in a roundabout fashion back to them to see how they actually did afterwards. So I guess one of the things I'm kind of just curious about is, you kind of mentioned, things change. And I know here at LogicGate, we change, we're a fast growing company. Things change rapidly, quarter to quarter, year over year. What have been some good ways to kind of like focus a control owner and like get them to really think about, this is why this control matters? Like, how does that shift when you have that kind of framework of having somebody that's, responsible, but might not be the person that's the most educated around why, we're doing it this way?
Yeah. So I think what I've seen work, at least for me here at LogicGate, is setting up a one-on-one meeting, even if they're new, or if I'm new to this process. For example, I came here, 9 months ago. So I had meetings with all of our control owners. And the first part was sitting down and saying, okay, here's some content that I built to educate you of like basically what a control is. Because I'm in it day in, day out. I'm like, oh, this is obvious, but to them, it may not seem that way. So Control owner 101. Okay, what is a control? How are we testing it, and why is it important, right? How can this help us to better our company, to better your processes, to, identify where there may be risk that we have to address in our process? So, yeah. Sorry.
That's fair. And I think It's a challenge I think everybody in the like risk business has to deal with, is that it's not a game of us saying that we don't trust you or we don't have an understanding that, you know, you're doing what's best for the business. It's like really, like you kind of said in there, that thing, how do you, and your answer, why does it matter? Why does demonstrating this have business value? And I think that can definitely have like a really good take of like taking those elements and then putting them in a way that, you know, is easy for you to have on a one-off basis, you know, in those one-on-one conversations, is like showing that, and then, you know, not making it a game of like, just trust me and do it, but really giving them the extra time to like ask those questions, understand why it matters, and hopefully come at you with some really good ideas on ways to maybe make it better or to add a new control or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a lot of collaborative sessions with you know, SMEs here at LogicGate walking me through what they have and them suggesting, you know, new evidence that we previously didn't use that may have been a lot better for the control that was asked. So having those conversations is really important.
I know you definitely have done that a couple of times with me where you're like, you know what, we could probably just do it this way and be a lot more simple. And I'm like, thank you for coming in and taking this and making this so much better. But yeah. So let's shift it. I know we talked a little bit about LogicGate, but I'd love to shift it to just the compliance industry as a whole. And so when we're thinking about just the trends and everything else that's happening, you know, I know we spend a lot of time figuring out internally, what's the next thing? Like, how do we help, you know, what's the new framework or what's the new process that we can do? Because at the end of the day, like, we want to make sure that we're, you know, aligning to best practices. And so I'm just curious, what trends are you seeing that like really excite you and like really would love to like implement here at LogicGate? Just curious what you're seeing on the market.
Yeah. So one I was reading about recently that I again, one of my favorite parts is working with people. And I like the subjective nature of it, but to boil it down, the trend I really was excited about is evaluating the culture of a company in internal audit. So taking what a lot of auditors consider to be a very subjective thing by nature, and making it real, quantifying the risks, evaluating the culture of a company.
How would that look? Like, what are some ways that you can kind of take something that's potentially subjective or not, you know, not really established, and then turn it into something, you know, that's, you know, I would say is hard to register as culture into an actual like objective kind of
right. Yeah. And that's one of the challenges, but you know, a lot of companies have processes already for monitoring their culture, you know, employee engagement surveys, insider threat monitoring by security. Internal audit could, you know, interview their control evaluations and get feedback, look at those surveys, for example, to identify areas of weakness, company turnover rates, you know, those play into a culture, right? I feel like when a company has a weak culture, there are trends that show high turnover. There are also reputational risks, financial risks when a blow to the culture has happened. So I think there's a lot of ways companies do it differently. You could do it through interviews. But yeah, I don't know. It's just
that's awesome. I like the idea. And I think it's kind of cool because there's not really a framework that says, how do you make your employees happy, you know, and how do you establish it? But at the end of the day, like, we've got a lot of things happening. You know, everyone likes to mention like the Great Resignation and things like that are like showing that people are, you know, not happy. But to your point, how do you establish proactive controls that indicate people are, you know, in culture are successful versus things where underneath the surface, things might be bubbling that, you know, pose a risk not only to just the ability to meet, you know, a process or whatever, but overall the company's performance as a whole. Like, if there's an indicator that you can have like that and show through the method of like making sure that these things happen, it's kind of like a unique way to be proactively compliant to, you know, the things that you think will drive the success and adoption of the culture of the company.
Right, exactly. And I know it will differ company to company, but it just seems like a really cool thing. You know, it's kind of out of the box for most of the traditional audit processes. So most standards don't take into account company culture. So it would be a cool thing to incorporate.
I love it. One of the other things that I know I poked and asked a bunch of questions to you before this chat about it, but I'm curious around the continuous control monitoring kind of trends that are happening. I know there's a lot of people that are really thinking about ways to adopt that, to kind of get a little bit more, analytical about how, the producing the evidence. I'm just curious what you think about that as like a trend. How's it going to shift the conversation if you were to have an automated process that collects controls versus people?
100%. I don't think people, at least for a little while, will be taken completely out, but the automation does definitely free up a lot of time for compliance experts, GRC experts, to prioritize and focus on the important things in that internal audit, in that external audit. Data for analytics, that's huge. Right now, we can kind of go through and, control by control, say, okay, I see where the gap is here. But across the board, maybe see, okay, we see inefficiencies or opportunities for improvement in this general category. Like maybe we spend some more time over here, just driving more efficiencies in internal auditing altogether. So
totally. And I think to kind of pull out something you had said earlier about having the conversation is that hopefully, if you're not spending most of your time bothering, not bothering, but like telling people, send me the evidence, and kind of doing those types of things, you can have that time, you can give that like shift of like, hey, instead of spending an hour collecting evidence, let's spend 30 minutes really spending about like how to do things better, or to spend time on those analytics to produce, some focus areas. And so I think that's a really good point in terms of like, like the people aren't going to go away. Like there's still going to be a compliance team, but their conversation and approach can really change because they can spend their time talking about the why versus the like how you demonstrate it, because it's already established.
Right. We don't spend 30 minutes explaining the population we need. We already have the population through automation. We just get to have, better conversations with our SMEs and improve it that way.
Love it. All right. I do have one more question, then we'll go, but I'm curious I love to ask this question just for everybody. Okay. If you had a magic wand and you could make one thing change for compliance, I'm curious if you could just pick one, what would be your magic wand that you would magically change for everybody?
I wish I had a magic wand. Ooh, that's a good question. I think it's, okay. There may be two things. Is that okay?
That's fine. I was going to say, I'm just curious how you're going to answer.
I know we have so many great technologies. The one thing I would change, it depends on where you are, right? I would change the manual processes, because in my old job, we did everything via spreadsheets, via like random ticketing systems where we would hopefully tag the right, piece of audit evidence or the right department. So eliminating those across the board just for everybody to make lives easier, but also to an extent you do have to be prescriptive, but like people who take it like by the book, right? Like it has to be this or else nothing happens, or you fail, like this or nothing. I think there's a lot more, flexibility and gray area in it than some people would like to admit. And so eliminating the black and white view of certain things.
I like that. I can definitely see that being a very helpful thing in a lot of different ways. Well, I would say, actually, I do have one more question, because I know you brought it up earlier and you were like the office, and I was going to ask you after the call, but let's just do it in front of the GRC Me group. If you could pick, whose personality would you say that I align to in the office? I feel like I got to know, and I feel like the people need to know.
Okay. I would say you are like an Oscar with like a sprinkle of Dwight.
Oh, okay. I'll take that.
Usually pretty
the solid. The farm part of the.
You have a weird Amish cousin. No. just a sprinkle. Some.
No, I love it. No, as I say, that's great. I felt like I had to ask, but no, I appreciate it, Elizabeth. I appreciate you spending some time, getting a chance to talk for everybody and kind of walk through some of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about as it relates to compliance here at LogicGate. So thanks again, and thanks everybody for listening, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Bye.